We would never endorse violent activity.
Now, joining me is the panel, Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching and Liberal Senator James Paterson. James, we're seeing one of the most, I think, important fights for freedom that we're going to see in our lifetime. This is really symbolic because there's Taiwan to come and others. Has the government done enough to help preserve the freedoms of Hong Kong and its 7 million people?
I think we have, Andrew, but you're right, it is a crucially important issue for the region and the world. Hong Kong's an amazing place and it is a beacon for the region and the world. What Hong Kong shows is that if you plant the seed of liberal democracy and free market capitalism, you tend it well, then it can succeed anywhere in the world, no matter the culture, the language, the ethnicity of the people that are around it. And perhaps that's why the Chinese Communist Party fears it as much as they do. I'm very sympathetic to the concerns of the people of Hong Kong about the extradition treaty with China. I was involved in the fight that we had here in Australia to prevent Australia from having an extradition treaty with China, but the threat posed by it is much greater for the people of Hong Kong than it was for us, because effectively it would bring Hong Kong under the complete and final control of the Chinese Communist Party and their unfair, unjust criminal justice system. So they are right to fight, and we have a great sympathy with their fight.
Kimberley?
Well, I agree with James. I think that what we're also seeing is the decrease in importance for Hong Kong as a financial centre for China. I think Shanghai has grown in that regard, and so China may well be willing to, to start to interfere, I think, more in Hong Kong, because they don't need to maintain the very important aspects of Hong Kong that they've had to in the past in order to, to have it as a financial centre for China. So I think that's problematic. I think it's problematic in that this kind of reminds me of Tiananmen Square, in that there was a long lead time of protests and then the troops and the tanks were sent in. Yeah. And this kind of reminds me of that. I also feel it's
China's been really issuing warning, haven't they? China has in the last couple of days been issuing warnings to shut up or something will happen. But Kimberley, has Australia done enough? Has Australia done enough?
Well, I think at some point, whether it's Hong Kong or Taiwan, of course, we've seen some comments in regard to that as well from Beijing recently. I think that we are going to have to make more, not just statements, Andrew. I think, we're going to have to decide what kind of country we are and what we really will, I think, what values we ascribe to and what we will help in our region to support and to protect.
I know. I wonder whether Australia's wonder whether Australians are ready to make the sacrifices that will necessarily mean to fight for our values. I think we've got some very hard choices coming up. Former Labor leader Bill Shorten today gave his first interview since losing the election in May, and he's talked about the shock of it. He didn't actually say much, but here is what he did say.
On the personal shock, though, what sort of grief process do you go through when there is such a grand expectation that you are going to be the next Prime Minister?
Oh, listen, it's happened. What I have been able to do is reconnect with my family, and that is a silver lining. And to the millions of Australians who voted Labor, Labor will still be a very determined opposition, and we'll still keep advocating our values that plenty of people wanted to vote for us, but we'll have to learn our lessons. That's why the party's engaging in a very extensive review. Did you find any comfort in the fact that the election was relatively close? Oh, listen, it was very disappointing. You can't gild that lily. Just plainly very disappointing. And disappointing for me, and I think disappointing for a lot of people. But nonetheless, it's happened. It's the democracy. As I said on the night, the people have expressed their view. So we've got to move on and be the best possible opposition. It's a privilege to serve in Parliament, I understand that. And I've still got the fire for politics and committed to making sure that I work as part of a united...
Kimberley, you're a close friend of Bill Shorten. He's not giving much away. How is he dealing with this?
Look, he is spending a lot of time with his family. And I think that, that's obviously, it wasn't just the election campaign It was, all of the time that he was the leader of the opposition, and I think that's been really good for all of them to be able to do that and, to take time out and to think through issues. I think he still has a lot to contribute. He is a very thoughtful person. He's one of the best, most well-read people I know, and I think I know quite a lot of well-read people, but he is, he's very thoughtful. He's a great contributor. He has really good ideas. So I think that, I think he will contribute, and I think that's a way of also dealing with, when you're very sad about something that's happened. I think being positive and being able to contribute is a way to deal with grief as well, or to deal with disappointment.
James, we saw Tony Abbott hang on after losing the leadership. Obviously, he was Prime Minister, which is some difference. Bill Shorten's hanging around. Do you see him, without wanting to, unnecessarily cause trouble for Labor by suggesting things, but do you actually see him as a future leader again, or is his run done?
Well, Andrew, there's obviously an opportunity to make partisan observations here, and certainly I'm pleased with the result of the election and the rejection of Mr Shorten's agenda, but I do feel genuine compassion and sympathy for him. There is no harder the job in Australian politics an opposition leader, and he did it for 6 years. You get less for murder in my home state of Victoria. It's a really tough ride. So I was very pleased to see that he has reconnected with his family, and I think there is a role for former leaders continuing to contribute to public life. I mean, I imagine someone as ambitious as Bill Shorten would have still some hope for future leadership, but even if he doesn't, I think there are still ways for people like him to contribute to public life.
And can I say,
well,
Andrew, I think
yes,
one of the questions for Labor is, a strategic question for the federal election. Federal elections are often about economic security and national security. And I think in state elections, they're about service delivery. And I think the ALP is very successful in state government. It's very good at service delivery. But we have to work really hard on issues that I think resonate more federally. And I think that's, a place where we can all contribute in the ALP. So I think there's, there's lots of ways to contribute.
Well, I have to say, at the moment, Anthony Albanese is making Bill Shorten's leadership of the Labor Party look deft, to be honest. I'm just wondering how Labor's been adjusting to its loss. I mean, today, James, I was really struck by this contribution from Labor frontbencher Stephen Jones, still sounding like, an unrepentant socialist, with his idea for kick-starting the economy, which does need a kick-start. But Jones's solution, simply pay public servants more. Here he is.
The government is a big employer in and of its own right. So it can be leading by example through all of the levers that they have to pull down on to say Australia needs a pay rise. This is what it should look like. We're going to lead by providing that to our own workers, and we think the rest of the economy should be following suit.
A Whitlam-esque contribution for the member for Whitlam. Is that a good idea, do you think, James?
Andrew, that policy idea is like a man standing in a bucket trying to lift himself up by the handle. It ain't going to work. And I am greatly relieved that Stephen Jones is nowhere near the Treasury benches with wacky socialist ideas like that. That would just burden the private economy even more than it already is, with all the taxes it already has to pay to fund our very generous social safety net and public services in Australia. We will get wages growth through all the traditional ways we have always achieved it throughout history, which is by prioritising a strong economy and a strong, competitive, vibrant, private, free enterprise economy.
But Kimberley, can you understand why, all right, I'm not Mr. Average Man in the middle, but you listen to something like that and you think, what on earth has Labor learned in the last 50 years?
Well, I think, remember, we're doing quite an extensive and in-depth review, and that is also including policy. So when that review finishes, we will have more to say about policies and,
Is that going to include the way to kickstart an economy is to pay public servants even more?
I think that they will look at all policies, including the policies.
Tell me they won't look at that.
And I think Anthony what he's said is, we will be hastening slowly. So we will be looking at policies, we will be developing policies. Obviously, we have a national policy forum, which is made up of MPs, but also branch members, and that's where the policy is done. We're looking to have a national conference towards, sometime, obviously, before the next election, and that will be, and that's where we will discuss that. And
I know you're in an awkward position. You can't say anything while all that stuff is going on. But gee, I have to say that's pretty poor stuff. Just finally, Crown Casino, James, we've heard all sorts of allegations. We've probably run out of time. I'll have to come back to that subject tomorrow. So for now, I'll have to say Kimberley Kitching and James Paterson, thank you so much to you both.